Millions of sales and millions of simultaneous players, servers crashing, plagiarism accusations and live threats. It is an understatement to say that the first week after the release of PALWORLD was quite chaotic. PALWORLD was announced in mid-2021. The game seemed like a weird mix of Pokemon with shooting mechanics and graphics similar to the ones from Fortnite. In the trailers that came after the first ones, it appeared that the mix will become even weirder, as it was announced that the game will also feature crafting and base building systems. Overall, few people knew what to expect from the game. Some people must have been hyped up, but I believe most people didn't take the premise seriously. Then, the release date had come. PALWORLD was launched in early access on January 19, 2024 for PCs and for the Xbox consoles. The game became an instant success. In the first few hours after the release, players were discovering the game's main mechanics and started posting about it on the social networks. People were having fun. Somehow, PALWORLD successfully blended mechanics from various genres of games and created a unique and different experience that resonated with the audience. Many were expecting an experience similar to the Pokemon games, but PALWORLD, while indeed has monster-catching mechanics, lean more towards survival games like Ark and Valheim. In the early hours, some curious functions in the game created a lot of buzz, such as the ability to put the monsters to work in your base, almost like forced labor, or the function to butcher the monsters to collect pieces or parts from their bodies. Another function that caught attention was the ability to capture humans and sell them in the black market. And yes, it is also possible to butcher the humans and collect pieces from their bodies. Those things were unimaginable in the other games from the genre. As you can imagine, the game's proposal and its peculiar functions sparked the public interest. The game reached 1 million sales shortly after the launch, and the numbers kept rising in the following days. By the end of its 5th day, PALWORLD has surpassed the mark of 7 million sales. These are great numbers for a big studio, taking consideration the fact that Pokemon is the most profitable franchise in the world, and one of the latest releases in this series was Pokemon Arceus, which sold 6.5 million units after 7 days of launch. But Pocket Pair, the studio that developed PALWORLD, is not a big but a small studio that was pretty much unknown, at least for the western part of the world. And there's also the fact that the game is not even complete yet, as it still is in early access. And speaking about the game's development, the CEO of Pocket Pair published a sort of journal containing personal accounts of many problems that were faced during the development of PALWORLD. As the journal is in Japanese and as I don't speak the language, there may be some inaccuracies in my interpretation of the following stories as I use a Google Translator, so I apologize in advance for any mistakes I end up saying. Anyway, initially, Pocket Pair had just a few employees, and no one in the team had experience with creating and animating guns like the ones that were included in the game. By luck, a guy with those kind of abilities was found, as he was posting videos about his creations on YouTube. He did this as a kind of hobby, as he had a job elsewhere, and by luck he lived in Japan. According to the journal, hiring someone with those kind of abilities is unusual for a small studio in Japan, as they usually get hired by big studios. There's another interesting story in the journal, and I think this one's kind of relevant to the plagiarism accusations. As stated in the journal, it requires a lot of work and time to animate the monsters, as every one of them has a unique skeleton with unique movement animations. And, like with the guns, the studio didn't have anyone with experience in making movement animations. Only after 6 months after the beginning of the game's development, they realized the problem that they got themselves into. But, in the end, they hired people that solved the problem. Beyond those issues, Pocket Pair also faced problems with budget and planning strategies. The game initially was developed on the Unity engine and later had to be remade entirely from the scratch on the Unreal Engine 4, and that required a lot of work to be finished. These are just some of the stories from that journal. I hope they share more accounts, images and footages of the game's development, because it seems like the whole process yielded some very interesting stories. But let's shift the focus back to PALWORLD's launch. Another notable achievement in the first days after the release was the fact that PALWORLD became the most played game on Steam during that period. In fact, PALWORLD reached the all-time second place in the Steam ranking of games with most simultaneous players, and during its first week, it managed to surpass the impressive mark of 2 million simultaneous players, something only one game did before. This amount of players is surprising and apparently caught the game's developer off guard, as the game experienced problems on the multiplayer servers. And speaking of multiplayer, some differences were noted between the different platforms, as on the Xbox consoles, multiplayer was limited to 2 to 4 players, while on PCs, the limit was up to 32 players. However, multiplayer issues were not the only source of problems for the developers. After the release, reports of bugs and issues with the game started surfacing, including an irreversible bug that will make players lose a significant portion of their progress. The studio said that 50,000 reports of bugs were received, and also said that in upcoming updates, these bugs are going to be fixed. Besides bugs, not only problems directly related to the game arose for the developers, but also problems related to the concept and the production of PALWORLD. Various posts on social networks compared the designs of the monsters from PALWORLD and from the Pokemon franchise, with some claiming plagiarism. Comparisons were shared and photos of pals and Pokemons were placed side by side. Noticeable similarities were found in the closely matched designs of some monsters. For example, take a look at this comparison. Although the colors between these monsters are different, it appears that there are similarities in their designs. Take a look at the similar shaped bodies, furs, small hands. All these matching characteristics raise questions like, isn't this too much coincidental? That was just one of the comparisons. There are compilations of comparisons circulating on the social networks. Another aspect that caught attention was the fact that Pocket Pair had previously released a game called Craftopia, which seems to have gameplay very similar to Breath of the Wild, with building mechanics reminiscent of Fortnite. Pocket Pair had also previously released a game called AI Art Imposter, where players used artificial intelligence to generate images through prompts. Considering the studio's history, questions about the use of artificial intelligence and plagiarism were inevitable, even more because people found old posts on X made by Takuro Mizobe, CEO of Pocket Pair, discussing the use of AI and how the perception of copyright might change in the future. These controversies heightened the emotions of some people, and according to Takuro, threats were sent to the developers working on the company. Hostile emotions apart, there are some good arguments on both sides of the discussion. Well, remember the stories mentioned in the journal about problems faced during the game's development and the issues with animating the monsters' bodies and movements. Maybe some shortcuts were taken during the game's development. Some people say that it's not by mistake that some of the models of the creatures from different franchises have such similar designs, proportions, and body parts. Some even defend that these configures are ripoff, and it should not be ignored. On the other side, people claim that it was expected that some monster concepts would coincide between the franchises, as some monsters are based on real-world creators. Situations like that happen in the past involving different franchises, and, as I mentioned, PALWORLD leaned more towards the survival game style than simply monster collecting and battling. Also, some people claim that in the end, if Pokemon models were not copied, most players will not care as long as the game is fun and as long as the game price is fair. I leave up to you guys to get your own conclusions, but all I know is that Nintendo will never allow us to shoot a Piplup from a bazooka like a rocket. Anyway, the game's release did not only generate hostile situations. Some funny ones also occurred. As the game was released for PCs, modifications were coming sooner or later, and as expected, someone already made a mod that replaced the Pals creators with Pokemons and even replaced the game characters with Ash, Brock, and Misty. But yeah, before the mod spread, Nintendo's lawyers did not waste their time, and the mod has already been taken down. Also, a very peculiar situation happened in Brazil with PALWORLD's release. The term pau resembles the Portuguese word pau, which, similarly to the English word wood, can be used to refer to a part of a tree, or it can also be used to refer to a certain part of the male body, the exact part you are thinking right now. This coincidence by itself would be enough to generate a lot of jokes in Brazil, but the content within and around PALWORLD has many pieces of information like this, and the Portuguese translation of the games intensified everything. That kind of situation happened in Brazil in the recent years, but not with the same intensity as it happened with PALWORLD. The game gave cause to an endless stock of dirty jokes and puns, and people did really enjoy the moment. Some content creators in special did not lose this opportunity. But yeah, overall, that's it. That was a brief summary of the first week following PALWORLD's release. The launch was a success. Before the end of its first week, PALWORLD had passed the mark of 8 million sales, very impressive for a game that still is in development. Since it's an early access game, the expectation is that new features will be released over time. A roadmap with upcoming contents for the game has been posted online. So, in a news article, Pocket Bear's CEO has said that PALWORLD is about 60% complete. People are already speaking about bringing PALWORLD to the PlayStation consoles. Perhaps the interest in PALWORLD will persist over time, and it will become a reference for survival or monster collecting games, in the same way as Stardew Valley became a reference for farming simulators. Or maybe PALWORLD will only be a fleeting hype. This, of course, if no legal problems end up interrupting the game's trajectory. Pokemon's former chief legal officer said that he was surprised that PALWORLD got this far. The Pokemon Company has made a public statement about the whole situation. While they did not mention Pocket Bear or PALWORLD by name, they say that they are aware of inquiries regarding another company's game released in January 2024. And they also say that they are intending to investigate and take appropriate measures to address any acts that infringe on intellectual property rights related to Pokemon. Oh, and PETA has said that it's aware of PALWORLD's existence and they want a vegan guide for playing the game. I don't think there's a vegan way of playing a game about killing, butchering, and slavering humans and monsters and animals, but who knows? But yeah, let's see if the next weeks or months will be as turbulent for PALWORLD as this first week was. Thank you very much for watching. I never made a video this long. My English speech is a work in progress, so I really hope you had a good time. Thanks again, and I see you on our next video. Bye!